much else. The chapter talked a lot about like the history of feminist theory, right? And we were introduced to the 5 different phases of what that has been through. And I thought it was really interesting the way that they presented it to, not think about it linearly, but think about it in a series of interconnected circles, I think is what they said, because they kind of overlap. But the first thing was male-defined curriculum, which used to be the standard, in many ways can still be the standard. Then contribution curriculum was brought in about, outstanding women and the way that they contributed to the world based on, again, male standards. And then bifocal curriculum had both males and females as points of view. And then the fourth was women's curriculum, where women's activities became a measure of significance. And then finally, gender balanced curriculum, where both women's curriculum inquiries were looked at in addition to how men and women relate to each other. And I also thought it was really interesting whenever they were describing gender balanced curriculum that there is all these pros, but a potential con is that we haven't spent enough time really thinking about women's curriculum, doing it enough, like spending enough time considering women's points of view or women's measures of significance. I thought that was very interesting. And then something else that was mentioned was the longue durée, which was like the slow glacial changes requiring hundreds of years to complete that represent significant shifts in the way people think. And I think that that's pretty evident in like feminism, where 100 years ago or more than that, it was definitely like standards of like women in the home, women shouldn't be in certain fields, etc. And it's taken literally like decades for it to get to the point where it's now. So like it doesn't really make sense to try to do a study, or it does make sense, but it won't show the full effects of how society has changed until like they do a long study about this topic in particular. What? I hate this so much. Oh, there it is. Okay, so another thing that I was thinking about when I was reading was fighting static gender roles. That is another like key topic. So in the video about the mother with her son, with her daughter, she was challenging the notions of gender roles in the video, Mom, I'm Not a Girl. And she was embracing it in all these different ways and accepting her daughter and showing her other children that it was totally a cool thing to do. I really appreciated the fact that the children were so accepting of this idea that they were able to help other children understand. And I think that was really cool. Schools have a history of reinforcing binary perceptions of sex and gender. This came up in the article, the Huang article, I believe, where she was talking about just the different ways in which, like, in the Disney movies and, in schools and stuff like that, sex and gender roles are enforced.
Hey, Marina, can you share your screen, because it's not showing up on the screen.
Oh man.
There you go.
Can y'all see it? I can't see it now.
I can see
us.
Big screen, yeah.
Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know. Right. So the first thing was the Mom Not a Girl video. The second thing was that article that was talking about like all the gender terms and the difference between sex, the difference between sexual identities and sexual orientation, gender identity, and biological sex, I think it was. And yeah, so she also was talking about different terms used by, they were talking about different terms used by transgender people to identify themselves on the gender spectrum. And they were also talking about all those 4 terms, like I said. And then this also came up in the article by Huang, where she was talking about how TV shows and media and schools contain generally messages of gender bias. Another big topic that came up for me, actually, sorry, so let me go back. Have you guys had any experiences with transgender people, and I'm not just talking about students, I mean people in general. Do you guys have anything to share about that?
I've had a student in the past where he it's kind of like an interesting dynamic. He identified as a boy, um, and he liked girls, but he liked playing with toys that are usually classified as girl toys and like hanging out with the girls, and so it was just an interesting dynamic. But the kids were really they were fine. It wasn't like a bullying experience or anything like that. Other than that, not really, to be honest.
So I actually have a student that it's confusing because the student doesn't do pronouns. So I get very confused, and I've, told the student, like, I don't know what to refer to you as. And they'll tell me they, or they'll tell me if you say he or she, it's okay. But they, and then I feel weird referring to one person as they, but they come one day and they're a girl, and they come the next day and they're a boy. And this is a 7th grader. So, counselors have been involved. It's a very strong-willed, strong-minded student. So people say stuff about it and I think attempt to bully, but it doesn't phase. Like, he has comebacks for days, or they have comebacks for days, and they don't let what people say get to them. Like, and I admire that so much. But I really think right now, just trying to figure themselves out, and I wouldn't say transgender, but like I said, one day it's full on girl, wants to be called a girl name. That could last for a couple of days, but I've never seen the same gender every day in a week.
That's really interesting. I actually don't have any experiences with my students being transgender, like on the spectrum like that. Like, I mean, I definitely have had students that are like, gay or lesbian or bisexual. But as far as like gender identities, not that I'm aware of anyway, or not, not that they were like aware of it themselves, or I really don't know how you would say that. I actually
until this semester. So like when we came back from Christmas and stuff, that's when it started. So I mean, we all noticed and we knew. And then really, I feel like at first it was made into a bigger deal because kids were going home and saying stuff to their parents. So their parents were coming up here, coming up to the school, and it was just made into a really big deal. We ended up having like pretty much a staffing, and, how do we support this child, and how do we, continue to just be there for them and still do the right thing. Like, but then it got into, well, what is the right thing? Because some teachers' religion would play a role into it, and their religion was just it was like, oh, my religion says, if you're born a male, you're a male. And then some was, oh, my religion says you love all. So it was pretty intense. And so this is something new. It hasn't been going on for a long time. And at first it would just be maybe one day a week that they would come to school like as a girl. And it just progressed more and more. But just very strong-willed student.
Okay. Well, I was just gonna say, like, the experiences that I've had with transgendered people have been with people that I've met throughout the years. Like, I currently have a friend, a pretty close friend of mine, who was born a female, but she is also they. And she's on the gender spectrum, like somewhere in the middle. So like not boy, not girl, just somewhere in the middle. And it is they. and they are dating someone who also identifies as transgender, and it's also dual, like a dual identity, I guess. And in addition to that, like I have also known someone who was born a male who identified as female. So I've just kind of had like several experiences with it, but it's never been a student. So I think when I was reading this, like I was somewhat familiar with some of the language, but I really don't know, how it would be in the classroom. But I suppose, I would try to be as sensitive about it as I could and all that. It just hasn't come up.
And I'm thankful that this student is such a strong student, and I don't want to say they don't care, because I'm sure they do, but the persona that they give off, and like very open with us, and he'll come to me and he'll tell me, they will tell me, Miss, if you messed up, it's okay. Like, if you call me Key, it's okay. And just having that openness and not, if I accidentally say he or if I accidentally say she. So I'm very thankful that I'm sure, if I have to experience it again, I'll be more comfortable and more knowledgeable thanks to this student. Because if I would have had a different experience, then, I could feel totally different about it. So I'm very thankful that the student is so open and honest and raw, and like there's no barriers that we have to get through to open up to us.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I hope that when it comes up, that my student will be like that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Really quickly, I did want to say something about like the Disney movies. Do y'all remember when Frozen came out, and it was such a huge deal, and everybody was talking about how it was the first Disney movie that they didn't have like a Prince Charming to come and rescue what's her name, Elsa.
Yeah,
I remember that. Crazy to me. Like, I'm very pro-female. As a matter of fact, today is International Women's Day, so
woo!
Ladies, perfect day to talk about this. But I'm very like pro-female, like yes we can, all that. So it was just crazy.
There's a Frozen 2 coming out
today. Just kidding. I know, not today.
Sometime this year, I think. I don't know, but it's Frozen 2. The trailers are out and everything. My son is excited, and then my little one, she's like 1.5, so she doesn't know too much about movies, but she likes the Frozen movie as well.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think it is crazy, but that's been out for a while now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see if they're coming out with the Frozen 2. Are they gonna have a Prince Charming this time? Since it was a big deal last time.
Other girl, and like there's been speculation about if it's going to be Elsa's love interest or if it's just going to be another strong female, but there's still nothing concrete. But they haven't shown like a guy specifically, other than
they're talking about like Elsa being like the first gay princess.
That's kind of what's circulating right now. See, this is what happens when you have kids. You know everything. Going back real quick on the like how kids identified, or how some kids are identifying now, I thought it was really interesting, and I don't remember which article. I'm trying to look it up, but it talked about how Facebook has 52 options now for gender.
Yeah.
I mean, I looked up just a picture. There's like gender fluid, gender variant, gender queer, gender questioning, gender nonconforming, and there's so many terms that sometimes I'm like, it's a little bit overwhelming. So how do we as educators kind of, I don't know, how do we educate ourselves when there's so much information out there? So it's like, as with every topic, it's all, you kind of have to pick and choose where you get your information from.
And how can we be sensitive to all of those and all of the nouns or pronouns that they want used and all of that? Like, it's a lot when, for however old, 25 plus years, we've been, if it's a female, she, or, like, it's important that we know these things, but when there's so many of them, it's impossible.
There's a show, and I don't know if y'all watch it, it's called One Day at a Time. It's really good. And one of the main characters, the daughter, she identifies as gay, is what I think, and then the girlfriend identifies as they. But there's a few episodes where they kind of go through and explain each one, but I really like the mom's reaction where it doesn't really matter what religion, what your belief is. At the end of the day, you have to learn how to accept children as they are and support them. And I think sometimes, like what Crystal was saying, it's kind of tricky for educators, and everyone has their own religion, their own beliefs, but like I think sometimes the tricky part is how do you leave that at the door, without you, do you know what I mean? Like you're going to try and support the students, but sometimes those biases kick in, and it's inevitable. They're going to kick in. I really like the articles. They were very, very interesting.
Yeah, they were really informative. I think I was gonna mention the other video about Jazz Jennings where she was saying that if you don't know, just ask.
Yeah.
So I feel like it really might be the kind of thing where for each student that this happens, that they happen to be gender fluid or what have you, we might have to ask them every single time. You know what I mean?
Show.
Sorry?
Do y'all watch her show?
No, I don't.
So I haven't. I think there's a new season out, and I haven't watched it. But I watched her show just because. Really, I started watching it because I wanted to educate myself on it, and I was lazy and I didn't want to read or anything. So there's this show. Let me just watch it because I had heard things about her and seen stuff on social media and stuff about how open she was and how just raw she was about it, and she was trying to, or I don't want to say trying, but in a way becoming the face for transgenders. And so even from the beginning to now, or to even not talking about the video, but her show, the last time that I watched the show, just her persona and the comfort that she has increased a lot. And I could never imagine being her age. I want to say maybe she was 12 when the show started, maybe. She just the power that she has. And I feel and this is my personal beliefs, I guess, but transgenders get so much hatred towards them, and whether you agree with it or not, I feel they're still humans. And
right,
one that's so young to be strong enough to be so open and so vulnerable, and to have parents that support her to do that. I mean, I don't have kids, but when I think about it, I think well, what if my child is gay, or what if my child comes to me and says that they want to be the opposite gender? I don't even know how I would react. So I enjoyed her show. So if y'all, because we have so much free time, right? But if y'all have time, it's good.
Yeah, that's what DVR is for. We can save it for later. But it's funny that not funny, but that you had said but they're human. I was talking to Sia and Rudy after class yesterday, and this whole topic came up. And I have a coworker who, in a department meeting, was saying that he has a freshman homeroom, and he has a transgender student in his homeroom, and I don't know where to sit them. I can't just mix them in with the middle of the rest of the kids, this and the other thing. And me and one of my coworkers are like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, I'm trying to make a seating chart for my homeroom, and where do I sit them? I go, the same place you would sit him no matter what. If you sit him alphabetically, put him in his alphabetical seat, or her. I think she put her, because I had to look it up. So I forgot he had freshmen, and we know how to access everyone else's homerooms. So thinking he had a senior homeroom this year, my friend who overheard this conversation with me, we started searching his homeroom students to figure out who it was, because if it was a student that we have had in the past, we were going to kind of pull him aside to see how things were going. Not tell him that the teacher was talking about him, but just like hold a conversation and find out if he was having any trouble in the school. And maybe like he would just bring up on his own, like, hey, she would bring it up on her own. But then we're like, oh, it's a freshman homeroom. We couldn't tell. But then I happened to walk by. It's how I know it's a she. I happened to walk by on my way somewhere, and I saw her walking in. And, well, I'm going to assume that they go by she. But I didn't know how to react when he kept saying, well, where do I sit them? And I'm like, in a seat. Like, they're human. I don't understand what the problem is. But then, like, I know that people have an issue with it. So while I'm open to it in my classroom, and I've had a few transgender students just the last couple of years, how do you fight, like, without knowing the student and without knowing if there's anything in the classroom that is being said to the student? How do you bring it up to someone to advocate for a kid you don't know, but you know these teachers' feelings on it? Because he was like super, like, he's very opposed to it. I'm going to be stereotypical, and I'm going to say he's an old white guy, and he has that old white guy mentality, which is a terrible thing to say because I was raised by an old white guy. But like, I don't, like, Crystal and I are looking at each other like, what do we do? We overheard this conversation. We can't just go to our supervisor and say, hey, or can we go to our supervisor and say that?
I think I would. I mean, again, I'm teaching at the younger levels, and so it's not as prevalent for the kiddos to be confused or anything like that, but or even like identify as anything. But we have that lovely coworker who every once in a while will start complaining about her students and talking about them and saying they're trash, or this is the, and excuse my language, but this is the crap that they give us. And I'm like, you can't talk about your students that way. And so, not knowing specifically who she was talking about, we went to our APs, and then they kind of took over from that, because you can't, whatever the situation is, you can't talk about your kids that way, and at the end of the day, you're advocating for that student, whether you know who they are or not, because that's not okay.
And like, yeah, it was just like, how do you bring that, like, you overheard a conversation between two teachers and you don't know the student, you don't know full context, but you know enough to know that. And I've heard things that he has said to students in the past, not really about that, but just in general, the way he talks to them sometimes. So then I'm like really concerned about how he talks to this student in his classroom.
So I feel like that's exactly how you tell someone. So sort of same situation, well, not same situation, but similar situation. Oh my God, sorry, my dogs are being needy. A teacher that I work with was making comments about the girls' weight in athletics and how their clothes was fitting and all of that, and it made me feel so uncomfortable. But I didn't feel comfortable telling her anything, just because she's one of those that there's no talking to her. And I bit my tongue, didn't say anything. It kept going. And as someone that struggled with weight her whole life, like, I know how it feels. And when you say stuff like that about a 12, 13, 14-year-old's weight, like, you can't do that. And as a grown woman, like, I wouldn't want anybody to say like a negative thing about my weight. And finally, like, Wednesday, I had just had enough. And I requested a meeting with like the athletic coordinator and my principal, and I met with them, and I cried just because I was so frustrated and mad and upset. And the first thing they told me is, like, why didn't you say something sooner? And I was like, I didn't know how. Mm-hmm. And literally they told me, you just did it. Like, that's exactly what we need you to do. Like, I mean, I didn't get in trouble or anything for not saying anything sooner. But they said, like, that's our job. Like, we're about customer service. Like, you're my customer and I need to make you happy. So if something's going on that isn't making you happy and it's hurting our students, then we need to do something. So like exactly how you just told us is how you could tell an administrator, whether you have direct ties with the student or not. It's like Kathy said, advocating for them, and that's what we're there for.
Yeah, we hear he's been telling his students that he's being fired after this year. Nobody knows if it's true. Nobody knows where he got that information from. But if it's even a consideration, then I might have a conversation with my coworker Crystal, and see if she'll go with me, and maybe we can kind of, I mean, I hate to be that person, but I don't hate to be that person, because I know I've heard things that he has said to his students. Like, I have personally heard things that he has said to his students that are super inappropriate. And our previous principal never did anything. Like, he just let all of this kind of stuff happen. So even though, like, I was in a similar situation with a coach telling all of her players that they're fat and they're lazy and they're this. And I did go to people and nothing was done about it. But I guess I have to be confident in our new administration, because half of our APs have turned over and we have a new principal. And I guess I have to be confident that they will step in and do something. But in the past, everything was always ignored. Like, we would tell them these things, and our former principal literally did nothing. If it wasn't good, he didn't want to hear it. So I'll have to talk to my coworker and see if I know she'll do it. She'll go with me and be, like, she'll tell our supervisor together. But it's like frustrating that we even have to deal with that. Like, they're a human. Sit them where you would sit any other human. Treat them like you would treat any other human. Like, I don't understand. I think they understand if we use the wrong pronoun, as long as it's accidental and not like, and I think that's what I worry about with some of them, in that a lot of people will be like, no, you're a he. I don't care what you think. I'm still gonna refer to you as a he, or I'm still gonna refer to you as a she, which I think that's actually the kind of person that guy is. But
I'm kind of concerned that, like, right. So I actually haven't experienced anything like that at work, but I think that if it did come up, I would probably go talk to my supervisor immediately. Because that's not cool. And I could definitely see it happening with like some of the people that I work with. I do recall last year, we were trying to like generate a safe space for LGBTQ people to go to in our school. And there were signs all over the school for it. So then one of the teachers who, everybody kind of has a hard time with, she was taking the signs down, like angrily, like in a huff. And some of the students saw her do it and they were very upset. So then, they came to several teachers to try to like to tell them about it, and they were just so outraged. And they had like a little protest rally in the front of the school. And I mean, like backed up by one of the teachers, and they actually asked the principal to do it, and the principal was totally cool. But I feel like there's still some staff that would not be, like some of the faculty would not be very open to it, So then I guess that's what we would have to be doing, is try to like advocate for tolerance, I guess. Yeah, I think another thing that happened last year was that two girls were holding hands and the same teacher was just like telling them things. It was pretty bad. But anyway, okay. So we were talking about, gender identity in that. Another topic that I thought was important was the ways in which gender is affected by other variables such as race, ethnicity, and class, or the ways that all things affect each other contextually, right? So that and the need to analyze the interactive nature of the oppressions of race, ethnicity, class, and gender. I thought that this was like really, really important to understand, because yes, like even within groups there are other subgroups, you know what I mean, of like the more oppressed or more privileged. And I think one of the things that I think this was in Banks' book, one of the things that Banks mentioned was that sometimes, I don't know actually if it was in this chapter or another one, but sometimes like Black women would see feminist struggles as like a white middle class woman thing, right? And that's because, you know, they were more worried about like other issues, maybe of racism or something. So then that would come up for them more. But then, yeah, like, so it just kind of seemed to me like there's levels of things to consider that maybe people just don't really consider when we're thinking about gender. Um, does anybody have anything to add to that? Okay. Right. So then I think that the next thing that I mean, all of the authors were talking about was different things that we can do to fight gender bias in classrooms and schools. Banks mentioned the 4 themes of mastery, authority, voice, and positionality, and like I feel like they went so deep into that. For one of the articles, the one about a gender identity, there was definitely a push for teachers to have an understanding of the different terms and the fact that there is a spectrum as opposed to binary conventions of gender, and that you can't just make assumptions all the time about what people are or what they identify as. For the Wang article, she talked about using gender neutral language in the classroom, making sure materials and activities are inclusive, representative, appropriately gender affirmative, sensitive, and balanced, encouraging that everyone is encouraged to participate and does, encourage the same positive behaviors for females and males, and avoiding assigning stereotype gender roles, and then addressing all acts that make negative gender comparisons. This kind of like stuck with me because I wonder if I even like unintentionally do some of these things. I mean, I'd like to think that I don't because because I'm a female, so I would like to think that I'm like all feminist pro and that, and like I've tried to do engineering before and I know how male dominated it is. But I do wonder sometimes if like my relationships with my girl students are different somehow than the ones with my boy students. I mean, I would hope it's in a positive way, but I'm not sure. Does anybody have anything about that they would like to say?
I know I'm guilty sometimes, especially in like with the younger kids. A lot of times we'll say, okay, if you're a girl, go ahead and line up. Okay, boys line up, or things like that. Or if you have a boy in line and a girl line. And I think it was mentioned in one of the articles. So that I try to remember, like, okay, you know, okay, if you're wearing stripes or if you're wearing shorts, if you have on black shoes, stuff like that. But every once in a while, it's just, okay, if you're a boy, line up. If you're a girl, line up. And I mean, like, it's going to take a while. There was I think it was in Banks, but it talked about anthropology, and I love how this connects back to anthropology, but it takes such a long time for there to be an actual cultural change. So, you know, we just have to be cognizant and make sure that we are always at least trying, not just, whatever, you know, blowing it off or something like that.
I'm for sure guilty of it as well, and I've tried to be like more conscious of it. I'll do that too. Like when the bell rings, I'm like, oh, girls can leave, like ladies first and all that. Or if I need like a desk moved, I automatically go to a guy, which I hate that I do that because like, you know, I've been working out and stuff. So I'm like, oh, you know, I can do it. So just stuff like that, like, or grouping, I'll do like groups of 4. So I'll do 2 boys and 2 girls, and just things that I need to get better at. And not think of them like a classroom management thing, like, because that's how I was thinking of it. Like, oh, I don't want 4 boys in a group because then they're gonna act a fool. Like, I don't have time for that. But at the same time, I need to be conscious of the gender roles that I'm putting on my students.
It's so ingrained, and I think the important thing is, like Dr. Shields was saying, we're open now. Like we understand, we know that that's out there. So that I think that's why we struggle so much sometimes, because we're like, oh, I know I'm doing it sometimes, or I need to stop, but at least we're aware, you know. And I think for me, if I know that I'm trying, then I'm okay with that, you know.
Yeah, I think that like I think that I generally try to be really fair, but I've definitely done like the desk thing. And then I'm also the girls volleyball coach. at my school, and I know sometimes the boys want to participate, but sometimes it's like a reversal of that. Like I want it to be a girls thing only, and then I'm wondering if they feel excluded, even though like males dominate a lot of things. I don't know. It's just kind of a weird thing, but yeah, I do sometimes wonder if like I'm like even in my tone of voice, if I address certain problems a certain way with girls or with boys, and like I think that's something definitely I'm gonna try to keep track of, because if I do, then that's really not cool. But yeah,
Yeah. I think the first step is just, like you all have said, is just paying attention to it. I think it's pretty normal, especially, well, I'm a bit older at 45, so just the way I grew up was that's the way it was. So I think it's just paying attention to it. And I had a conversation on Facebook. Somebody, I don't remember who the celebrity is who is raising their children to be like gender neutral. And of course, some of my friends were all in a tizzy about it, and how stupid it was, and and I said, I'm pretty sure what they mean is they're not going to force boy stuff on boys, girl stuff on girls. They're going to let them choose like what they want to do, how they want to do it, how they want to, but basically they're letting them be their own person, and they're starting at a young age. And in my message was a bit longer than that. And I mean, aside from not using a he or she, like I couldn't really think of anything else they meant other than like the video that we watched over the summer with the engineering, and how like the girl wanted to do it and everybody kept telling her, no, you're a girl, no, you're a girl, no, you're a girl. So then when she walks by that big science fair thing, she just kept going because she's been told her whole life, no, you're a girl.
I've seen that video. That video makes me so sad.
Right. So, and I like that, that's what I tried to say. I'm like, I think a lot of the way we treat girls and boys automatically sends them in a direction, whether they want to go that way or not. And I think more people are just becoming aware of just letting them make their own decisions. If a girl wants to pick up a hammer and nails, let her pick up a hammer and nails. If a boy wants to do hair and makeup, let him do hair and makeup. Like, who's to say? But I don't know. A lot of my friends, I don't know if it's age or if it's still society, where I see a lot of, not my friends, like people I went to high school with, I should put it that way, that still have issues with it. And I just I don't know, I don't want to say I hope that their children end up not being what they want their children to be, but I kind of hope that if that's the way their children are, that they're brave enough to come out and say it, I don't really want to, like, I don't wish anything on anybody, but I just hope that if because oh my God, one of my friends, guy I went to high school with, like, I looked at his kids, because he's former military, his kids both have that strict military haircut, and they always have their, like, everything is so, like military-like, and I'm like, God, I hope your kid rebels against that military lifestyle at some point, Not the military itself, but, like, one day just shows up with, like, gauges in his ears, and kind of looks like my kid. But, just to be like, I am me. You can't make a decision for me anymore, People see my son sometimes, and like I see friends like talk about the man. He doesn't have the man bun, but his hair is long enough to do it. And I'm like, who are you to say? Like, he's still a good kid. He's still smart. He still works hard. Who cares if he has giant holes in his ears and a beard and long hair? Like, whatever. Tattoos. He's working on full sleeves on both arms at 22. Whatever.
I think it's very much a societal thing. So I'm 25, and I think like my group of friends and all that, we're so much more accepting than like, our parents and stuff like that. Like if you look at YouTube and makeup, as Colin was saying, like boys in makeup is so big, and you have people like James Charles and Jeffree Star. So like even people that don't watch YouTube videos and makeup videos have heard those names somewhere. like if I'm watching a YouTube video and my boyfriend walks in and he just hears the voice and he's like, another James Charles video, Crystal, really? So I just think our generation is so much more open to it. And you go to the Galleria and, you know, they have the Morphe store there. I went last weekend and there's so many men that work there, full face of makeup, like beat. And
Better makeup than me.
yeah, it's so acceptable. Like, it's okay. So I think it's a societal thing. I think it's a generational thing. And
it's a cultural thing too. I mean, it's different aspects.
And there's 3 women in the Houston area that are a full-time employee with Discount Tire, not including like the women that work at their central office behind the desk, like physically changing tires. There's 3 women in the Houston area, in the Houston region, and the Houston region really is Louisiana too. So it's a whole bunch of stores. And I told him, like, if you didn't work there, I would be the one to go apply just to see if they would hire me because I was a woman. Because I just, like, it bothers me. And I've asked him, like, do y'all just not hire women? And he's been working there 6 years now. And he said women come and apply all the time. They interview all the time. I don't know why they don't get hired. So I think if a woman wants to go and work at Discount Tire, by golly, they should be able to do it. And if a man wants to have a full face of makeup and be a famous YouTuber, they should be able to do so. But I think it's societal and generational and all that, and I think it'll get better over time, but it's going to take a lot of time.
Yeah, I definitely think it is. But I think, like I said at the beginning, like, I think we're definitely making strides towards that. And it starts with us, right? Like, if we become informed, then we can inform our colleagues and, you know, teach our students, like, that culture of respect and tolerance, and hopefully make a bigger impact in the long run. In the bottom of this slide, I put that Jazz mentions in her video how we could address our transgender students with respect and how we can teach our students to be towards their transgender peers. And I feel like that kind of also ties into that, you know, because she's out there putting that message and informing us. So, like, I feel like it's cool and that we can inform others about this and teach them to be tolerant. So in the Mom, I'm Not a Girl video, Mom, I'm Not a Girl? Yes, Mom, I'm Not a Girl video. I really like the line, you notice all the constructs around gender, and in the same way, you become very keen on the way you treat girls and the way you treat boys. And this is from the mom, like when she was talking about her son, you know. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, I loved the mom in that video. Like, she was just so accepting and she was just embracing it and really asking herself those difficult questions about, like, what is gender, to be able to, you know, accept her son for the boy that he is. One thing I already mentioned was the Jazz Jennings quote that if you're not sure which pronouns to use, just ask. And I think that that's really important for everybody to know, not just, you know, not just teachers, really. From the Banks chapter, I like to educate students for a complex, multicultural, multiracial world. We need to include the perspectives and voices of those who have not been traditionally included, women of all backgrounds, people of color, and females and males who perceive their education as not made for them. So then I think that for this, like, we need to talk more about, like, in class, about people who have potentially been on the fringes in terms of gender in the past, because there's got to be people who identified as such. And, you know, it's just barely now becoming a thing that's seen as more acceptable. So maybe that's something that we can talk about in class sometime, even in math. Another thing that I thought was really interesting was the quote of, the goal is to build a world in which the oppressions of race, gender, and class, on which the capitalism and patriarchy depend, are challenged by critical citizens in a democratic society. So again, I feel like that ties into the way that we're supposed to teach our students to ask questions, like always ask why. and like especially our students who are not male or who identify somewhere on the gender spectrum besides the binaries, like give them a voice and teach them to advocate for themselves, and just how to be able to stand out from being oppressed. And then on the Baum and West, man, I was really confused about that title. On the Baum and Westheimer article, to understand is a critical first step toward changing school-based practices and toward being advocates for all students, regardless of where they fit in on any spectrum. And again, I feel like we've been talking about that. Like, it's important for us to understand, and we're becoming educated about this as we go along. So some of the implications were that teachers has to become familiar with the ways to address gender and how to dispel any notions of predefined binary gender roles to which students must conform. We have to teach in a way that legitimizes our students' voices. We have to start by asking ourselves questions about our preconceived notions about gender and understand and accept our students in every single way. If something like this comes up, and stuff like this comes up in my classroom all the time, at least, use teachable moments to address gender issues in the classroom. So like the thing, like you were saying, like if I want a student to move a box, for example, and I automatically go for boys, like I think that that's maybe a moment where I could stop and be like, wait, what I did was not cool. Like I definitely just stereotyped, or just something like that. And then also fluid gender identities allow individuals to reach their potential and their full personhood as opposed to binary gender norms. And I think that that's really true. Like, I feel like people that have fluid gender identities perhaps live fuller lives than people that don't necessarily have identify as gender fluid, if that makes any sense. I mean, because they're able to, explore areas of things that are considered to be male, and then explore also areas of things that are considered to be more female. And they're able to do that in a way that people that stick to like conventional gender norms or gender roles probably wouldn't do. Okay, so I have questions. Besides the suggestion given at the end of the chapter 6 in Banks' text, how can we balance issues of gender in our instruction?
I think especially for science, I think it was Banks, yes. In the Banks article, they mentioned one of the, I guess, spheres or circles about like how we introduce topics, to our students. And I myself learned something new in this chapter about Mary McLeod Bethune. That's my middle school was named after her, and like we knew the basics of what she did and why she was important. And then, sorry, I'm trying to find I took the quote. I'm trying to find it. But they talked about, we should also mention that, yeah, she was important in the New Deal, but what about her aggressive work to project a positive image for African American women? Like things like that, our students don't know. I didn't know. And so I think in terms of balancing that, it's making sure to include not just, like the key people like MLK or, that's the only one that I can think of right now, but like including other people that contributed to different scientific areas, not just gender, but also races and religions and all sorts of, whatever spheres we're looking at the time.
I think that, like, I would think it was like about, I mean, like I said, using those teachable moments in our instruction where gender comes up, and then like definitely being like conscious about bringing women more into our actual subject, which is something that I have to admit I don't do enough. I don't think that I talk about women almost like at all this whole year in terms of how they contributed to like the mathematic topics that we're talking about. But I feel like if we brought them up and then maybe like, discuss their struggles, then we could talk about that. That would be a good segue into having discussion about gender issues in class, if that makes sense. Okay, next question. How do you feel gender stereotypes or gender biases affect your teaching?
So I'm guilty of this. Like I said, with like the moving of desks and the grouping and all that, but I feel like I classify like my boys as being rowdy and just being the more of the troublemakers when really it's not a boy issue, it's a middle school issue. So I feel like it affects my teaching by just giving me a preconceived notion about my students before they even do anything, which I always thought like, oh, I don't do that. Like, I know I learn the kid and judge each kid individually, or not judge them, but like have my thoughts about them because I got to know them. And then after reading this, I was like, oh, yikes. So really just gave me the opportunity to reflect on it. But I do think that it affects my teaching before I even start teaching.
Yeah, I can't really help but feel that my boy students are rowdy as well. But I guess like that's just something that I guess I should say struggle with or something. But then, something that happened today was that I was like trying to put grades in since the cycle ends today and all that. And I looked up and some of the boys were on the ground wrestling. And like I feel like the girls would just never do that. So it was just super weird. And it kind of does make me feel like, okay, boys will be boys, but then I'm like, okay, but I gotta address this. It can't just be like doing all these shenanigans.
We've been having issues this year with kids bringing water bottles to school and putting like vodka in it. And I'm like, first of all, you can literally see the alcohol floating in a clear liquid. You can smell it, and you're obviously drunk, like as if we don't know what drunk people act like. So they get caught sometimes later in the day than others. But they were talking and they were like, I can't believe the girls were doing that. And another teacher was like, what do you mean? Like, just because they're girls. And then when I was reading this, I was like, oh my God, like literally they were being judged like a gender bias because they're girls, that they wouldn't bring vodka in a water bottle. And in my head, I'm like, shit, I do that every time I go to an Astros game. Like, it's crazy how now reading this, how many like things connect and how much like you're like, oh, that's what that was. So yeah, but it was like a really big deal that it was girls that were doing it. And I even said, like, why is it a big deal that it's girls that's doing it? It should be a big deal that it's happening at all with 7th and 8th graders. Like, what?
Yeah, that's crazy.
I don't even know that we've had that happen on a regular basis on any high school campus that I've worked on. I mean, it's happened maybe, but not like it's where it's been a big issue. So yeah, I would have been same thing. I would have thought I'd be more concerned that 7th and 8th graders are doing this than whether it's a boy or girl thing. That's crazy.
And they were worried about the wrong thing.
Right.
That happened to us in my first year of teaching. The 5th graders were doing it. Don't know exactly what group of kids it was, but I know they were doing it in 5th grade. And I'm like, nope, we need to address that real quick. Whoever it was, we need, they were worried about the wrong thing, I think, for sure.
Yeah, that's really crazy. I don't know about it happening in our school, but I don't know. I teach high school, so I just assume it does. Anyway, all right. How can we work past our own bias in our classroom?
So I think, like Colin said, the first step is like, step one, admit that you have a problem. So the first step we need to do is admit to ourselves and to others or whoever that that is what we're doing, and we are going to work on it. So just recognizing that that's what you're doing, and like the readings that we're doing, that's taking steps to get past it and stuff like that, just to recognize. To me, I think is the biggest part, and then we work past them from there on more of an individualized basis. I think so, at least.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much just recognizing it and always educating ourselves, which is what we, not about this in general, but what we tell our students all the time is to always keep learning. And I think that's the position we're in now, is to just continue to educate ourselves and be open, which we know in our group we are. And then, I guess my next goal is, how do you work on those who have those that aren't as open, like, now I can educate myself. Now, how do we educate everyone around us without being like that pushy, would it be a neoliberal? Like, like without being like all in your face about it, but, educating people along the way.
Yeah, I think that awareness is basically what we need, right? Okay, so how have you dealt with issues of gender in the past? I can kind of speak to some of this. So, like, I feel like there's just so many experiences that I've had. So definitely, I feel like culture ties into gender roles very deeply. And I know that this happens generally, that, generally speaking, like women do this and don't do this, and males do this and don't do this. But although I've never felt like I couldn't try to work outside the home or something like that, I definitely, like, whenever I'm with my family, I feel like I have to take on a certain role. When, like, of like the caregiver, and then like whenever like we cook meals, we also serve them and stuff. And I feel like it's like a small thing, and I feel like, to my mom at least, it's like she's addressing, she's showing like love or something to everybody when she does that. But I think that like her asking me and my sister specifically to help her is like, it totally ties into gender, like a gender role type of thing, and I don't really like it. So I've actually said that to her before, and I had to like actually tell her in these terms. And I think like she might have been offended or heartbroken or something. It was really strange, but I mean, I told her, and then it's kind of terrible too, because it's like now my brothers expect it, and I think that they may have that expectation also of like the women that they date, and like I just don't think that happens as much anymore. So there's definitely, I don't know, there's just definitely a disconnect there between my mom and that. And then, like, in addition to that, like, another experience that I've had is like I was going to school for engineering, and I was literally the only girl in there most of the time. And that was definitely a challenge. Like, I had to like definitely go out of my way to try to be included sometimes, and then that was really hard. And I don't know. Like, I remember at one point, my academic advisor told me to stop. To like, don't you think it's just time to give up already, or something like that? And I was really, really upset about that. So I was just like, no, I'm gonna keep going. I actually have yet to finish, but I'm only a year away. And then the last thing that I remember is, so now at my current school, I teach engineering like as one of my classes, and I do it the senior class, and then my a coworker does the freshman class. And when we were getting trained for it this past summer, we were talking to someone, and they asked me, well, what's your goal? And I told them that my goal for teaching engineering was to just encourage more girls to pursue the field. And when I said that, he chimed in with, well, we want more boys to go into engineering too. And even though what he said wasn't like explicitly sexist, I definitely felt like it was a jab because, I mean, it's not like I want there to be less boys in engineering. I just feel like there needs to be like a bigger female presence. And I had already had like this like idea of this person, this like colleague, as being a little bit of like a sexist sometimes. So then like, that just did not play well for me. And I, unfortunately, because I was like in unfamiliar territory, I didn't really speak up, and I like really regret that now. But those have been like kind of my bigger experiences that I've had recently, I guess.
Have any of you noticed, and I don't know if it's because of the times or the class that we're in, but as you said that, like, well, we need more boys too, that the more we fight for women and the more we fight for minorities, the more people want to remind us about the white guy or the white male or boys. Like, the more we fight for equality, the more they push back with, but we need boys in engineering too. Nobody, you never said you didn't. You know what I mean? But their first thought goes to, we need more boys in engineering too. And it's like, I never said we didn't, but look at the engineering world. It'd be nice to have more females there too.
Yeah.
Is it the class, or is it just like that makes us notice it more? Or like, would we have noticed it more anyway? Is it the times? And that's why we see and hear it more because of the way the climate, the culture that we have now and just in our society in general that makes us notice it more because now they're speaking out more. But I hear it so much as soon, like you said, as soon as you say, like, I have a friend who's now computer teacher, and her big thing is girls who code. And as soon as she said, and like everyone, of course, jumps on this, well, coding's not going to be around forever. It's not the point of having them code. It's getting girls in fields they've never been in before, or that they're a minority in, you know?
Right.
I don't know. It's just frustrating that the more you try and fight for things, the more people are pushing back now, it seems.
Yeah. I think for me, it's more empowering my girls. And, I do see it a lot where some of my girls are like, well, what do you mean I can code? I'm just a girl, Miss Hughes. I'm like, no. And or you'll get pushback from the students who are boys, and they're like, what, girls can't do that? Yes, they can. And I get all angry with them. I'm like, oh no, yeah, girls can. They can do that. They can play soccer if they want with you guys, like playing outside or whatever, and y'all want to exclude them. Or I don't know, I get really upset over some of the little things that the boys say, or sometimes even the girls, when like they themselves say, well, why are you still going to school? You have kids and all that already. I'm like, go back, rewind, what? No. And so we will sometimes stop and have those conversations about, times have changed. Girls can do this, girls can do that, boys can do this, boys can, that's just how it is now. And I don't know, I still see it every once in a while with my younger students for sure. Going back to the like issues in the past, I feel like it wasn't just gender, it was a little bit of everything, but I had a teacher in, what grade was I in? 7th grade? No, 8th grade. I was in 8th grade, and she was my homeroom teacher, and she pulled me aside one time because I just kept talking, I really want to go to, I'm from California, so I was like, I have my heart set on USC, that's where I want to go to school. And she pulled me aside one time, and she's like, I'm sorry to tell you this, but, girls like you'll probably end up pregnant when you're 15. And I'm like, my jaw just dropped. I'm like, I'll show you real quick. And like, for me, that was not everything that pushed me, but I was like set out to prove her wrong. And I'm like, 8th grade graduation, and it's 8th grade, it's middle school, but still I was valedictorian, and I went and dropped the trophy in her room, bam, and then just walked out. It just got me all like, it got my blood boiling when she said that.
So I have like something similar to Marina. My mom doesn't work. My mom cleans the house every day. There's a hot meal on the table when my dad gets home from work. And that was always the norm to us. And when we would have family functions, the women did the cooking, the women did the cleaning, like they served the men. And I think it was very like a cultural and like racial thing for us. And now my boyfriend's white. So when he came around and my grandma would get on to me like for not serving him, and they would make me serve him, and go throw his trash away. And finally I was like, I'm not doing it. He has 2 legs, he has 2 arms, they work, he can do it himself. And it was like such a like my grandma, oh my, she was so upset that I said I wasn't going to serve him. And I told my boyfriend, I said, I'm not going to do it, because I still do it for my grandpa and my dad. But like, that's my grandpa, that's my dad, that's what they're accustomed to. That's what I've done for them my whole life. But I told my boyfriend, Joey, I was like, don't get used to it. He's like, oh, this is nice. And I'm like, don't, because I'm not doing it. I work just like you do. Like, it's not like, not saying that I think that it makes it right per se, but my mom says like she does it because she doesn't work. And to her now, there's no kids in the house. That's her job. Her job is to keep a clean house and to keep my dad, healthy and fed and everything, so he can continue working. And so she just views that as her job, because that's what she's been doing for all these years. And now it's so much different to her, because instead of doing it for my brothers, but she never did it for me. As soon as I was old enough to start helping, that's what I had to do. So it was like a really serious conversation that me and Joey had to have, where I told him, I'm not doing that. I'm not my mom. I'm not my grandma. Like, you go make big money so I can get my job, a hot meal. But I just didn't want to be put in this gender role that I feel like my grandma and my mom are in. So kind of like the same thing as Marina, but yeah, my mom wasn't upset with me. My grandma was the one that was super upset, and she started serving him. And I'm like, well, you do you. You want to serve him? Go right on ahead. I'm not doing it.
I actually have to say that like I'm like really glad, because I think my boyfriend kind of understands that, so he doesn't really make me like do anything. Like, not that he could, but like he doesn't. He really doesn't push it. And then also I have to say that like, yeah, for the longest, my mom was the one that was at home all the time. But like, she like recently became a resident in the US. So she started working. And like, so now it's like she's also like, she's still growing, and transitioning in her like way that she sees herself, I feel like. So I'm really happy for her for doing that. And when I talked to her about it, she's like, oh, well, you and your sister are my inspiration and all this. And I'm like, Mom, she's so sweet. But yeah.
I still get a lot of heat from my mom. I've been married to my husband. It'll be 6 years. 6 years, sometime in March. And I still get stuff from my mom. Aren't you gonna serve him? Or, Kathy, go see if he wants more food, or pick up his dish. And I married the white boy, so he's like, yeah, no, you don't need to do that. Every once in a while, he's like, okay, it might be nice if every once in a while you did. I'm like, okay, every once in a while I do it, just because I'm used to it, kind of like with Crystal. I'll serve my dad. I'm like, oh, okay, fine.
Right there.
Yeah, for sure. We're used to it, but I was just not down with the fact that it was a requirement.
I still get it from my mom. She's like, wait, you're telling me you're home from work and you're not cooking the meals? I'm like, no. My husband cooks more than I do. I don't actually cook that much. I can follow a recipe more or less, but no.
And I don't think that my dad like ever expected it or required it or anything. It was just my mom just started doing it and never stopped. And now, they've been married 35 years, 36 years, something like that. So now like that's their routine. Like that's,
yeah.
So now he just expects it. And I've done it, since I was, like I said, able to help my mom. So that's why I still do it for him. Like, not because I want to subject myself to that gender role, but just because, like, it's my dad, I've been doing it all this time, I can't really tell him no, but I can tell my boyfriend.
That's right. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. If y'all are good.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. All right, let me click stop, and it should pop up.